Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargav, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In this episode, we talk about the latest report by the International Monetary Fund and what it means for India. We also talk about the heavy rains in Uttarakhand and the destruction that they have caused. But first, we talk about Jammu and Kashmir. Throughout last week, militants continued to attack local residents and migrant workers in the Kashmir Valley. On Sunday, 2 migrant laborers from Bihar were killed, taking this month's death toll to 11. Now, after these series of attacks, on Monday, hundreds of migrant laborers left Kashmir out of fear and concern for their lives. In this segment, we speak to Bashaarat Masood, who reports on J&K for the Indian Express, about the situation in the valley. And he starts by telling us how things appear on the ground right now.
After the spate of recent killings, there is fear among the migrant workers who are putting up in Valley, and a large number of migrant workers are leaving Kashmir for their respective state homes. But it would be more appropriate to say that there is a general atmosphere of fear in Kashmir. Whether they be the migrants, or they be the Kashmiri Hindus, or even Kashmiri Muslims, they live in an atmosphere of fear. And we can say that the security situation right now is not very good. And there has been enhanced security after these attacks, after these killings. In fact, the police from the last 2 days have been seizing all two-wheelers. Whosoever is plying on the road, he's being stopped and asked to deposit his bike in the local police station. So security has been enhanced, but the fear is still visible on ground.
When talking about the security measures, he says there has also been frisking of pedestrians, an increase in checking of vehicles, and the army, paramilitary officers, and the J&K police are patrolling a lot more in the region.
Then the migrant workers who are still putting up in Valley, they have been moved to safer locations by the police. Like they have been shifted to the government buildings like schools and hostels to give them a sense of security. So over the last 3-4 days, we have been seeing that security has been beefed up across Kashmir, especially at the vulnerable spots.
In the middle of all this, Bashaarat has been talking to a lot of migrant laborers who come to the valley every year. Among them are fruit sellers, masons, carpenters, and barbers.
There's a sense of fear and there's this sense of disbelief. They are not able to understand why are they being targeted. They say that they are poor workers from different states and that they have come here to earn a living. They have nothing to do with the politics. But if we go back to 2019, before the abrogation of Jammu and Kashmir's special status, the militant leaders, militant commanders, they issued statements wherein they said that if the special status of Jammu and Kashmir is abrogated, anybody who is from outside Jammu and Kashmir, irrespective of his religion, whether he's a Hindu or a Muslim, he will be treated as a settler and they will be targeted. But these poor laborers, poor workers are not able to understand this.
And J&K's special status was taken away on August 5th, 2019. The special status is what gave J&K its autonomy, what allowed it to have its own constitution, its own penal code, and what determined the right of permanent residence in the region. But after the August 5th decision, all that was gone. Plus, the state was bifurcated into 2 union territories. Bashaarat says that after that happened, there had been similar attacks on non-locals, especially in South Kashmir.
I think in Kulgam, some 5 laborers were killed on the same day. And also there were attacks on truck drivers from outside states in Shupaya also. And the situation is more or less similar to 2019. The killings in 2019 had triggered kind of an exodus of non-migrant workers from Kashmir, which has happened this time again. Also, the security has been increased like in 2019. The situation is more or less similar to 2019.
The migrant laborers in the valley have been coming to work in the region for years. According to some estimates, around 3 to 4 lakh migrant workers come to Kashmir every year.
Most of them are from Bihar and Uttar Pradesh, also from Rajasthan and Punjab. They are mostly engaged in the construction business like masons, carpenters and laborers. They prefer Kashmir because they call Kashmir as the Dubai of India. Because in Bihar, for example, a daily wager gets rupees 200 a day. But in Kashmir, the same laborer gets rupees 500 a day, or if he's a bit skilled like mason or carpenter, he gets something between 600 to 700, or at times even 800 a day. So they say that when they come to Kashmir for work, they are able to earn something and save something for their families, send something back to their families, which they cannot do while working in their home states.
This is what attracts them to Kashmir, a chance to earn better wages and send more money to their families. They do this despite the security situation in the region being tense and despite the conflicts that have been raging for the past 30 years. Bashaarat says that right now hundreds of them are returning home in a state of confusion and chaos.
And these laborers who are leaving Valley, they do not know when they are going to come back. But then generally this was the season when most of these laborers would go back to their home states, because with the onset of winter, there's little activity going on in Kashmir, little work for them. So most of them leave at this point of time. But they're not sure when they will come and return, but they hope that they return to Valley soon. Like they get this hope from 2019 when they left Valley, but they were able to come back within a month or 2 months. They hope that this time around they will also be able to come into Valley very soon.
And next we talk about the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, the international financial institution that aims to promote financial stability, monetary cooperation, and growth among countries. Last week, the IMF released its second World Economic Outlook of the year. The report is significant because it provides important insights about world economies, and this time it specifically raises concerns about unemployment rates not reducing and growing inequalities between economies. In this segment, Udit Misra, who writes on economy for the Indian Express, joins us to talk about this report. So, Udit, before we talk about what the IMF report says this time, could you talk about why it is considered significant?
Yeah, so the IMF comes out with the World Economic Outlook twice every year, once in April, once in October. And it also comes out with regular updates for these outlooks. Like the last time we had an outlook revision was in July. And similarly, IMF continually keeps reviewing how the global economy is doing and where are the growth impulses coming from, or where are the problem areas arising. The significance of the World Economic Outlook is that you get at one place comprehensive picture of how the global economy is doing, which are the areas which are dragging it down, which are the areas pulling it up. It helps policymakers because today we live in a connected world, and it matters to know where the growth impulses are coming from. A country like India could evaluate whether it's countries that trade with it, how are they doing and what are the problems, and its policies can be tweaked accordingly. For example, China is going through a bad phase right now, and it will help for the whole world to know what is the nature of the crisis or what can be done to rectify it. So in that sense, it's a benchmark report.
Okay, so what are the main takeaways from the report this time?
So, see, on the face of it, the IMF has brought down the projection for global growth just a tad, from 6% to 5.9%. But it has also highlighted where the areas of concern are, and mostly on the advanced economy side, inflation worries that are troubling policymakers. And among the emerging economies and developing economies, there other sorts of problems are coming up. For example, one crucial thing is about the recovery in employment lagging the recovery in output. So in value terms, maybe the GDP would have grown, but we are seeing increasingly across the world, even in many developed countries, but more so in emerging and developing economies, that employment hasn't recovered as much as the output has recovered. And that has massive policy implications.
Right. And apart from the problem of unemployment and the way economies have recovered, the report also talks about economic inequalities. Could you talk about what the report says in that regard?
Yeah, so the major area of worry for the IMF is that there is what they call it, a dangerous divergence in economic prospects between different countries. I'm just quoting from the IMF report, which says that the aggregate output for advanced economy group is expected to regain its pre-pandemic trend path in 2022 and actually exceed it by almost a percentage point by 2024. So the advanced economies are almost back to their pre-pandemic growth path, and they are likely to exceed that growth path in a couple of years. But the aggregate output, the GDP coming from emerging markets and developing economies category where India falls, that is expected to remain almost 5.5-6% below the pre-pandemic number for, say, 2024. So what basically they're seeing is that the weaker economies are seemingly struggling to go back to pre-pandemic levels, whereas the stronger economies are already back there and perhaps going to accelerate further in the next 2-3 years by 2024. So that's the key area of worry. And they have highlighted two main issues. One is obviously the large disparity that is there in the access to vaccines. So as we've seen in India also, and in many of the other countries, like say, take any country in Africa, the access to vaccine is much lower than what it is in the developed world right now. We are hearing about, booster shots and stuff being given. We are still struggling to come up with our first full quota of double vaccination. So that is one massive issue that is holding back growth. And that is the reason why most of the developing economies or emerging markets are behind the pre-pandemic level.
Right. And before we talk about the other problem, I want to talk a bit more about the problem of vaccine access and how it's connected to growth. So is it that when you don't have enough people vaccinated, you then can't fully open up the economy, and you also have people who continue to burden the healthcare system, which in turn puts pressure on government systems and restricts the way you want the economy to grow?
Exactly. I mean, to a great extent, as it's being said, that it's now becoming, with the vaccines being available and all kinds of vaccines being available, it's now a pandemic amongst the unvaccinated. And what that basically means is that if a large portion of your population is unvaccinated, then even those who are vaccinated cannot take the full advantage of a normalizing economy, because work, say a train, a metro station, you cannot have half the people vaccinated, other half not vaccinated, because that sort of defeats the purpose. So the whole point is that you get as many people vaccinated and hopefully everybody vaccinated, at least 2 shots of the initial vaccines, so that you can move on with normal business activity. And this is something that we've known from the very first day. Even when the pandemic started, we knew that this is a pandemic which will affect economic activity precisely by this reason. The more economic activity that there is, more the pandemic will spread. And that is exactly what we're trying to do here, that have more vaccines, whether it is due to hesitancy or because of lack of vaccines, that those barriers should be crossed and we move back to a normal world where economic activity can pick up.
Okay, so vaccine access is one reason for the economic inequity. What is the other reason for it?
So the other crucial issue is policy support. By that, we basically means what is the kind of support or help the government is providing. So as we've seen in, say, advanced economies like the US or many of the European economies, Germany or UK, the governments have been willing to spend far more in terms of money directed towards helping companies retain workers, give money to those who've been retrenched or out of work, some kind of an allowance to survive this period. And all of that money basically that the governments have spent there has resulted that their growth has not faltered. The people's consumption has not faltered as much, and the economy is normalizing. They're getting those jobs and moving on. Whereas in many of the weaker countries, we could take India's example, where a lot of people have been asking for more government spending so that people who've lost jobs or companies that have lost workers may be able to employ them back, and overall aggregate demand in the economy recovers. And that hasn't happened to exactly the extent that you would want. And that is why there is this increasing inequality emerging in the global economy.
And when we talk about this report, what does it mean for India? What significance does it have for us?
So for the time being, at least on the GDP front, which is typically the variable we always talk about, there has been no markdown on India's GDP. In fact, India's GDP is expected to grow at a healthy rate this year and next year. But the worrisome part with India's GDP or India's growth story that IMF has highlighted is about the growing divergence again between the better off portions of the economy, the K-shaped recovery that we've been hearing about, that the more organized sector has been doing better, the more unorganized sector has been doing worse. And that has implications for employment because roughly 90% of all of Indian jobs are in the informal or the unorganized sector. So if the unorganized sector is not doing well and the recovery is only happening in the organized sector, the formal sector, and within that also there is a K-shaped recovery in the sense that the listed firms are doing much better than the unlisted firms. So we are seeing these differentiated levels at which the economy is improving. And the odd thing is that many sectors which actually create a lot of jobs but may not create as much GDP by value are struggling. So jobs are not recovering as fast as they should recover, whereas GDP may be recovering faster.
Okay, so the report talks about how despite GDP growth going up, unemployment remains a problem. But talking about it from the Indian perspective, what are the reasons that unemployment in India continues to remain high?
Well, one was the initial conditions. So, we've detailed this in the story that I wrote, that a total number of employed people in India were, according to CMIE, were 394 million. If you compare it to May-August 2019, which is sort of before COVID, that number was 405 million. And if you compare it to 5 years ago, which is May-August 2016, that number was, I think, 408 million. So it shows, first of all, two things. One is that we are lower than the pre-pandemic level, at least till August 10, for which the data is easily available. And secondly, that even that pre-pandemic level was lower than, say, 2016. So which is to say that we already had a very serious employment problem. So we always talk about unemployment rates, but I was giving here the total employed number of people employed, absolute number. And that number is either lower or has stagnated at the very least that we can say. So that is part of the problem. And the other part of the problem is that, and this IMF also explains in a much greater detail, is that the pandemic has hit. So there was already a problem with India's employment. There was an informal and formal sector divergence, largely against informal sector. And what the pandemic has done is that it has hit employment of the people who are young, who are low skilled, and women. So if you think in terms of inequalities, it has just exacerbated those inequalities which already existed in India. We did have a higher youth unemployment level. We did have a problem with low skilled workers and unemployability in those people. And we have one of the lowest female labor force participation. Women in the working group are very few. Our rates are around 20%, which is comparable to, say, Saudi Arabia or some such state. So it has just exacerbated the already existing fault lines that were there. And that has made the inequality even deeper.
And in the end, we talk about Uttarakhand. Last week, heavy rains continued to batter Uttarakhand, which led to floods, landslides, and massive destruction of property in the state. As per the government data, a total of 52 deaths have been caused by heavy rainfall and landslides. Additionally, 17 people have been injured and 5 remain missing. In this segment, Indian Express's Avaneesh Mishra joins us to talk about it.
So there has been heavy rains that started from Sunday, and the Kumaon region is mainly affected by this. And I was talking to some authorities in the weather department, and they were telling me that since the time they have started keeping data of rains, that is 1897, like for the past 124 years, this was the highest single day rain recorded in that particular area. So by that, we can understand that this was a really bad situation for the authorities and for the hilly areas on the Kumaon region. And that is why there was a lot of destruction. There were landslides, and Nainital was the worst affected because all the 3 important roads which connect Nainital to the rest of the state were damaged, and the entire traffic was stopped. So because of that, all the tourists who were in Nainital, because this was a festive season, and I was talking to the Hotel Association in Nainital, and he was telling me that they have almost 380 to 400 hotels, and it was completely jam-packed by tourists. And around 14,000 to 15,000 tourists were coming every day before the rains started on Sunday. So we can get an idea that there were a lot of tourists in that city at that time, and because the roads were damaged, no one was able to get out, and they were all stranded. Other than that, the Nani Lake and other water bodies were overflowing, and that's why in some places the water was entering the hotels and the residential areas. The electricity and water supply was also affected. So definitely there was a bad situation for Nainital basically and the entire Kumaon region.
And Avanish, what do we know about the rescue operations that are underway right now?
After the rains started on Sunday, so Sunday was not that bad, but things started getting worse on Monday. And Chief Minister, who was on a visit to Ayodhya, he started taking meetings with the SDRF teams and the Disaster Management Committee and all. Prime Minister took cognizance of the situation and the rescue operation that was going on. After that, three helicopters were called from the army, and two of them were sent to Nainital, and the other one was sent to the Garhwal region. So, with the help of the SDRF and the NDRF team, the rescue operation was continued. And if we talk about the latest information, then I'm getting information that the two of the three roads which were connecting Nainital have been repaired, and the traffic has started, and people have started to leave. And earlier, I was telling you that the hotel occupancy was almost 100%. Now it has reduced to only 20% because the people are leaving, and no new tourists are coming in the city and in the region.
And what does the India Met Department say about how the weather is going to be in the coming few days? And also, have the rains now stopped?
The rain has stopped in most of the places. The rains have stopped in Nainital, and the sky is like pretty much clear. So things are getting better. As I said, like several roads which were damaged because of the rain and landslide have been repaired. The traffic has started. The electricity and water supply is resumed as of now. And people, either they are living on their own or they are being rescued by the SDRF teams and the army helicopters. So hopefully, and even the Met Department has said that the situation is going to get better because no more rains are expected in the coming days. So hopefully the situation is going to be get much better.
You were listening to Three Things by The Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargav, and was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.